Hey, Thorsten, thank you for coming in. You have just a marvelous background from your early roots in Germany and education in information technologies, and then technology leadership roles and hyper growth startups to investments to I mean you've done just really marvelous things throughout your lifetime in so many different areas and found areas, and we're going to mine some of that. So thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with our audience.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephen, for having me. It's really a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this interview. It always brings out, unpredictable things that I didn't even think about or I didn't even
Yeah.
notice. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
So I'm going to interchange between Thorsten and Thor, because sometimes you're
It's fine.
known as
Yes.
Thor. So Thor, what were the inflection points in your life that made you who are today? And it could have been when you were 3 or 5 years old. It could have been mentors inside, outside the family. It could have been challenges, things that were really difficult and it
Yeah.
shaped you in a particular path. And really, because you've got such a marvelous professional life, but also personal life as well. What really made this wonderful person you are today?
That's very kind of you to say. I think the first thing that I remember that really changed the way I looked at things is that my parents let me be very curious. I think it's like I noticed that like when I was probably 6 or 7 years old and I was at a children's birthday party and the other parent always said, don't do this, don't do that, to the child, and I said, no, we're going to do this. And at my birthday parties, my dad never said that. And my mom, they just let me play and invent games and be curious about the world. And I think that was really an inflection point for me because for me, the bulk garbage day in Germany, we had like bulk garbage day like once a year was the highlight for me because everyone put the electronics trash outside and I would like collect it from the side of the road and then like start disassembling everything to the point where my dad said, this can't be in the house. It's all this electronics trash. And of course I would never be able to put it back together. And then I stored it under the stairs of our house, secretly as I thought. But, later on, I obviously realized my parents were well aware about all the electronics they were under the house. But letting me do that was incredibly generous of them. And it was not until much later that I realized how much that changed how I look at the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really interesting because I'm always thinking that in Germany, it's kind of more classical thinking, probably more disciplined, and they actually gave you a sort of a freedom to explore, to innovate, to try things, to experiment, which in some sense has kind of like an American piece to it, right? Like a
Yeah.
Silicon Valley kind of upbringing. So I can see how that inspired you to be who you are today. And so you're exploring, you love this kind of mass junk day because you could see all these electronic stuff and you could
Oh my
take them
God.
apart and you'd store them underneath your place and that would then continue to foster your curiosity and your ability to try, right? So it sounds then like when you were very early, you were really also interested in like the sciences, the math, and things like that. Were you also interested in like literature and areas like that, or was it more science oriented?
So I would say in literature, it's the typical teenage literature, the love letters and stuff like that. That's not really literature at the time, but the songs where you like the all the lyrics that you internalize, that are not that literature, like not that smart. But what I was always into was music from very early age on. And I think it's because my mom really was always dancing and singing constantly. And sometimes I would come home at night from big band practice and she would be with her headphones on dancing in the living room,
Yeah.
and that musical part was incredibly important to me. I was teaching trumpet and trombone for the church choir. They had like a trumpet thing. So I was like one of the youngest C class authorization holders within the church, like musical education. So I had to go through all the directing and setting a choral and doing the organ and all of that.
Yeah.
Um, but that service aspect was always great. And jazz music is just amazing because it's more about listening and improvising. And, there we are again of experimenting. And yeah, I guess I also learned the hard way that you can only experiment once you know the craft. You actually have to practice. You can't just improvise. That doesn't work well. And but that taught me a lot, I think, interacting in a very creative way. So music was always part of my life for sure.
Again, that's really, really interesting, right? Because music has this lot of freedom of expression, and there's very much a creative element to it. So, and you have to do, in essence, a creative combinatorial thinking, and especially when there's jazz and things like that.
Yes.
But as you indicated, that also has to be grounded in practice and having some fundamental skills. So having a basic skill set. And by having that, then it allows you to even be more creative, right? Because you connect more diverse pieces together. And it's like you working with all the different kind of electronic components and things like that. That would give you that base of being able to work with different kinds of things, and then it then enhances your creativity because you got more to work with, right? More of this combinatorial thinking of fitting different pieces together.
Yes.
So now you pursue a higher education at the technical university and earning a master's in information technologies. But during your university years, you nearly dropped out to lead an ambitious project, helping build a new medical research center, designing its LAN, WAN info systems, so local clinics. Can you talk about that? Because that gave you hands-on engineering and your passion for building complex systems, right?
Yeah, I think what's interesting here is that I would love to say that this was all planned and I had this inspiration and then I did it. It was really white male overconfidence. Okay, it's like, oh, that should be easy. I could do that. And so the ignorance of hard problems, I think sometimes is very helpful to experiment. For me, it was I was going to the university and I was studying and. At the time when I went to university, we still had a conscript service. So, you had to actually go to either military or civil service. And for some reason, the German government had lost my conscript information and my medical exam, and then they couldn't actually draft me. And so it was always in the back of the mind. And suddenly in 99, they said, and tomorrow you have to show up at the army barracks. And I said, wait a minute. Like, I'm studying still, right? So what do I do here? And at the time, I actually, like you said, I was working at a software engineering firm. I was programming. I had put my studies kind of on hold. And suddenly the heat was on. I had to finish my studies in 2 different majors, or actually 3 different majors. And that was a terrible idea. And at the same time, had to find something that was not army, because at the time I was actually very, very, very pacifistic and very much against all armed conflict. I had seen the civil war in Sarajevo from, firsthand, and Yugoslavia falling apart firsthand. Was there in 92, 93. Not a good experience. And so I couldn't do that. And so I wanted to have a meaningful civil service very late in my life, right? It was for me, very late in my life. 27, right? 26, not 18 or 19 when other people do the civil service. And so I decided to go to a med clinic, and specifically there in the building department, and specifically there because they were building a whole new med clinic and they had to deal with all these IT issues. And I saw that I could really change something there. I could really have a positive impact that is more than just, doing some data entry or something like that. And I thought this really is a skill set I can leverage here. And so I ended up, like you said, building the ground floor of a med clinic. I, of course, was not an architect, so there's always an architect there. But we went through the books and we basically said, these are the wet cells, these are the beds, the doorknobs, what to put in. And I was just ordering all of that and putting it together. It was phenomenal fun. And then, of course, the IT system, connecting the radiology department with the oncology department, and they had all different servers at the time, and Token Ring was a big thing back then, so that kind of dates me here. So it was absolutely phenomenal. And I had like free reign because, no one expected me to do that. And when no one expects you to do something, you can do so many more things.
Yeah. So again, it's like the mass trash day of electronic goods. There's you can
Totally.
you can explore, right? Or your music background where you can explore. You get the base, and then you can explore in any direction you want. And this then again allows you to unlock your creative aspect, right? Because you have the expertise, but you can explore different kind of solutions in a way that nobody else can. And so very entrepreneurial, very innovative as you're doing this. And it's very much aligned with your background. It's like your mother doing music, right? Singing and things like that. So just free expression. You got to do free expression and LAN and WAN information systems, building complex systems. That's really fascinating.
I think for me, it was also about respectfully breaking rules. I think there are sometimes rules that you don't quite know why they exist, but if you're respectful about breaking them, then either people let you do it, actually say, okay, there is a rule, but here's an exception, and we let them do it. Fine, right? Because why would they let me build a med clinic? That's a terrible idea. But then also being okay if you get berated, if people are angry about you, because you did break a rule and you knew it, but you can be very respectful about it. You can say, okay, I get it. I shouldn't have done that. I'm really sorry. How can I make it work? How can I make you whole again? Right? You have to take ownership about that. I think that's true. If you break things, you fix it. And I think that attitude led me to many more opportunities in that journey than, just trying to fit in a cookie cutter thing or just trying to like sneak by things. I think the ownership actually created more opportunities than breaking things, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's this venture mindset, right, of exploration and innovation. And so then you get your start in technology and entrepreneurship in the early 2000s, right? You had technical leadership roles in hypergrowth startups, serving as an engineering lead. And so you get this experience as an operator in a startup. And startups are very difficult. They're volatile. You have to have a lot of agility. You have to be resilient and yet have optimism as well. So you keep pivoting and trying and thinking about ways to make things work. And so you get firsthand experience in scaling technology companies, which will later inform your approach as an investor and advisor. So can you talk in a kind of condensed way of some of the experiences in working with these startups?
Sure. I mean, in 2002, I moved to America, which is probably the second big milestone that really changed everything, and started back then a technology consulting firm, a subsidiary of a German company, T-Systems, a systems integrator. But the team was all American, like very American focused, and the customers were all American. So there was some Deutsche Telekom, Germany leftover stuff, but a lot of American customers. And we were tasked with building very large petabyte data centers at the time. 20 petabyte a day was large. Nowadays, it's the standard. But back then, it was very incredibly difficult data center. And for telecoms, that means regulation, it means standards, it means like lots of things that incredibly taxed the infrastructure. And the only way to solve that was with startups. There was no incumbent who could solve it. And so very quickly, we turned to startups on the innovation side and try to chaperone them through to actually work with large enterprises, right? So how does a 10 people startup scale into 100 in order to serve a very large enterprise services? Incredibly painful. And of course, made many mistakes. And I thank God we had actual VCs who knew what they were doing. But Of course, they very much liked me because I was the one who was writing $10-20 million checks into startups as a customer, right? I said, oh, we like the Thor guy. We actually, he's always writing checks. You should keep him close. And so I actually got close to the VCs that way because they wanted me to obviously look at the next startup that needed a 10 million or $20 million check. I think at the time I wasn't aware of that, right? I thought, oh, they really like me. Very American style, right? You're suddenly everyone's friend, and I did not get that back then. I was very ignorant, but that also meant I had not a problem with that per se, because I learned so much. I was so grateful that startups took the time to explain their problems to me and let me tinker with it and help them find the next, VP of operations who was kind of left field, but we, had a project with the three-letter agencies, and so they needed someone from left field, and I found that person, and they let me experiment building a unit there, and that was incredible, great. I mean, I'm really grateful for them to let me experiment with organizational setup and technology at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting, companies you worked with and contributing to them and the notable investments. And that's where you transitioned into T Venture of America,
Yeah.
which is the Silicon-based venture arm of Deutsche Telekom as a senior investment manager, where you work closely with portfolio company teams and boards, helping startups expand into Europe and global markets. Because you have a deep technical background, operational experience, you'll be able to guide your investment decisions in sectors like mobile network and enterprise software, and that's all of your background. And so, you contributed to numerous, I should say, tech startup investments during this period, like Demandware, e-commerce platform, later an IPO on New York Stock Exchange, Ubiquitous Mobile Communications acquired by Cisco, Scorpius Technologies, Semiconductor Photonics, Affirmed Networks, Telecom Network Virtualization, that later acquired by Microsoft, ASIA, Broadband Optimization, Jawbone. I used to use Jawbone Technologies, consumer electronics.
I have to stop you there because I feel very embarrassed about this. So yes, I did these deals and I managed them, but when I joined T Venture North America, they basically like the two managing partners had left, and I had to rebuild an organization. I became managing director within 6 months, and I am well aware that the reason that I got access to phenomenal deals was not because me, it was because of Deutsche Telekom. Let's be very realistic about that. The then CEO Georg Schwegler of T Venture was, incredible that he entrusted me with that he let me manage $600 million of portfolio and deploy new things in, co-invest with Index and Andreessen into early stage startups. But it was, of course, because of a brand and the background and the promise of the 10 million, 20 million check, right? That I got access to these. And in a few cases, like in Demandware or Affirmed Networks, I was surely managing the follow-on investments and the portfolio and the growth, but in reality, there were very senior VCs involved, right? And I was along for the ride and learned a lot. I don't think I want to say I have anything to do with their success here. They were phenomenal founders and great technologists, and it's the startups who should credit for the success, not the VCs. We're not even in the back seat; we're in the trunk of the car. Okay.
Yeah, but a good VC is really on the bench with the founders, right? I mean, you're living their experience, you're listening to their concerns, and then you're injecting your experience as well and your networks and your relationships to help grow them in some way. I mean, and some of these, or actually many of them I'm familiar with, like Jawbone, consumer electronics. I used to use their products, right? Or Blue Gene Networks, video conferencing, acquired by Verizon, Lookout, which is mobile security, as Cipher Cloud, cloud security, Numinous, and Claus.
Right,
yeah, I mean, it goes on and on and on, right? And these investments really spanning mobile IT infrastructure, really inflection point technologies.
At the time, this was frontier technology. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but you were honored with Deutsche Telekom's International Award for Excellence.
That's
So
right.
it,
Yeah.
you do have some magic as well, right? There's magic in these founders, but Deutsche Telekom, and again, German companies are quite disciplined and they're very. And my impression is they're very governance oriented and very sort of disciplined. And so when they give you an award, that award is not. It's because it's well earned, right? And the international award for excellence in innovation for your contributions, right? A recognition of your ability to identify and support innovation ventures. So don't you think that's quite an accomplishment? It definitely would help you as you became your own VC, right? So
Yeah, I think I'm very grateful to receive that award because it, like you said, it opened lots of doors. I'm always a little bit hesitant because the real work again was done by startups and probably also by product managers at AT&T, Verizon, DoD, CIA, NSA, my customers, right? Who actually integrated these solutions, who had the vision of the platform. And I feel like, I found solutions to difficult problems, but there needs to be a strategy and there needs to be leadership with a vision. And I think the people I worked for, my customers, had an incredible vision and incredible tenacity as well to realize that vision. And without their guidance, I wouldn't probably not have found those solutions. And I think it's always a team effort, not just one person.
it's a team effort, but your Rolodex is gold. Right? Because you're forming relationships as you're doing this work, and because these are such notable investments, right? And you're backed by a notable company as well.
Yeah.
And but you also show excellence, so you're distinguishing yourself as unique with unique talent. And then you get into New World Capital, and you join New World Capital in San Francisco.
Next World Capital. Yeah, Next World Capital.
Next World Capital, and
Yeah, I mean,
as a principal on their investment team, right? So
that's right. So it became clear that the strategy of T Venture with the change at Deutsche Telekom would really change into more a strategic pre-M&A unit, which I had a hard time doing because as a VC, you're trying to maximize the value of your exit in order to create return for your LPs. As an M&A unit, you try to acquire something very cheaply. And so those two things, I don't know how that works together. And so I didn't want to do that. And Sebastian Le Pinar, the principal behind Next World Capital, incredible person, an incredible human being. He basically is from the Le Pinar family in France. And in a nutshell, he did an MBA at Stanford, realized his family money might not be optimally invested, and started 7 companies. like that, like incredible foresight and ability to have great people around. So at Next World Capital, it was really like a dual purpose together with Craig Hansen and Ben Fu, phenomenal partners, very insightful, high integrity, which I really, really, really appreciated. And it was on one hand investing into infrastructure and software, but on the other hand, also using that infrastructure to help underserved in ultra low income and low water. It was 2 projects that they had, ultra low income and water, to better manage plantations of coffee, for example, doing mixed plantations, making sure there's support for families, making sure they have year-round employment so you can have schools and other things around those plantations versus migrating workers where you have no security and no ecosystem that stays and grows. So incredible experience. And while I'm saying that, people called me because I had left Deutsche Telekom, and people call me like, "Hey, how did you do this VC firm at Deutsche Telekom? How do you do corporate venture capital?" And my answer was, please, you don't start it. It's really hard. And so at that point, I always pointed them to fund of funds to say, why don't you get your hands wet with fund of funds and look people over the shoulder to understand portfolio management with a very active manager. And I had managed Top Tier and Northgate Capital and others, and all these were the ones that I really liked. And at some point, the CEO of Northgate Capital called me and said, "What the heck did you tell them?" It's like, "What do you mean?" It's like, they think we're creating a fund for them, for these people, for one LP. I said, well, if you get three together, might be a good idea to actually create a fund around them. And actually, then what happened? So there are three corporate venture capital entities, each with 40 million commitment, and we created a telecoms fund. And then the CEO asked me if I would join that fund, and that was a very difficult decision, but also a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. And I went to Sebastian and said, listen, this is what happened. What should I do? Because when do I get the opportunity to become a partner at a VC firm? I don't have an MBA from Wharton. I didn't have my $1 billion exit, right? I'm not a Stanford, UC Berkeley guy. I'm just this weird German. So, and he said, oh man, go for it. Take it. It's a great opportunity. Again, incredibly grateful for him to give me that opportunity. And so I joined, after a little bit over a year, I joined Northgate Capital. Again, like completely random. Did not expect to do that. And wow, phenomenal firm. I mean, rock solid. Touchdown Tommy and Brent Jones, former 49er football players, with 7 Super Bowl rings. I mean, like everything is training. Everything, is constantly training the whole team. And it's a team effort and team sport, and that permeated the whole firm. It was an incredible opportunity to have that.
Yeah, so I'm just going to wrap up a little bit on the Next World Capital. You were there from what, 2014 to 2016, and you joined Next World Capital in San Francisco as a principal in the investment team. Definitely an expansion stage venture group, concentrated investments in big data, cybersecurity, enterprise software. You also took on a business development role, growing a Next World Capital European advisory network to help portfolio companies expand internationally. And you leveraged your transatlantic experience to connect U.S. startups with European partners and customers. So again, that Deutsche Telekom background, your German background, but you're leveraging it, right? Shaping the global go-to-market strategies. And then in 2016, you moved to Northgate Capital, a global venture capital group, private equity firm with about 4.8 billion in assets at that time.
That's right.
Eventually rose to partner in their San Francisco office, and as a member of their venture or firm-wide investment committee, you oversaw the growth of Northgate's fund products, spanning fund of funds, co-investments, direct venture investments, and secondaries as well. Right? So, and you were instrumental.
Evans, amazing partner that I was able to hire, like really awesome. Like Justin is fantastic, and he's still there. And a great team.
Yeah, and you were instrumental in raising multiple funds. In fact, you raised 9 funds, I think, in total across your that time period. And you also spearheaded due diligence on venture fund managers at Northgate. You evaluated 700 plus fund managers per year to identify the best emerging funds. A reason I relate to that, because I do that in my sovereign funding work. I'm on the investment selection committees, and what we do is we fund managers or venture capital managers. So I can relate to that kind of, what makes for a successful fund manager and things like that. And then in parallel, you led direct investments in cutting edge technologies, focusing on areas like this resonates with me. And I just finished a keynote in this area for the IEEE on robotics, quantum computing, cybersecurity, and critical IT infrastructure. And managing this close to $5 billion. I led or overseen 120 plus direct investments, and a strong net gains to your investors as well, 3x, 7x, etc. So. It is just a tremendous background of success, and as you're a humble servant leader, so you're always, acknowledging your colleagues and things like that. But you do have that spark as well. In other words, I work in sovereign funding. We look at fund managers, and there's these special sparks you see, right? So you definitely have that. You definitely have and you mentor other fund managers, right? So.
I think one of the things that my dad instilled in me as a public servant that he was, is really the service component. I mean, serving others, I think, is so important, and giving back what someone like out of their heart like shared with you. They didn't have to do that. I mean, I was so lucky to have so many great people that I learned from, and I was always puzzled that venture was such an opaque business, that fund of fund investing was such an opaque business, that how do we evaluate as an LP GPs? How do GPs value opportunities? Why do we invest? There are so many answers to that, but it was such a mystery. And I thought that's kind of strange because it shouldn't be, right? It's people business, and we should share what we learn. I mean, you might be completely wrong, by the way. That's okay too. But if I say something that's wrong and you correct me with it, then I learn something. If I just keep that for myself, I might never learn anything. Okay. So for me, the most pleasant stuff was pleasant experiences was when I teaching at UC Berkeley or Northeastern University as an adjunct professor. Oh man, these students are just phenomenal. They ask you so hard questions, right? Why do you do it like that? It's like, yeah, that's actually right. Why am I doing it like that? And so they challenge assumptions, and now you have to explain to them the concept so that they understand it. And if I can't explain it, then obviously I didn't understand it. And so a great exercise for me. So sharing actually makes you learn more about a topic because you need to think through all the details. And that's incredibly rewarding for me.
Yeah, but it's again going back to this idea of servant leadership, right? You're serving the broader community, you're serving the venture community, you're serving empowerment, economic growth, serving underserved communities. I mean, across all of the dimensions, it's all about service. It's really quite remarkable. And I mean, you even took active leadership and board roles with portfolio companies. I'm a board member. No, I don't know if I pronounce this right, but Viptela, or is it
Viptela? That's right. And that, many other companies, 23 board seats in total. And there are a lot of very difficult tech companies with security aspects, with, proprietary customers in DoD and defense that require a certain integrity and service attitude. Otherwise, you will not find those customers. And that for me is incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, in fact, Viptela was later acquired by Cisco in 2017. But you have a real hands-on approach, and it kind of reminds me of you. It's the mass garbage kind of annual day where all the electronics and hands-on, you're taking things apart. I mean, hands-on with your vet clinic work, hands-on with your land and WAN work, hands-on with your music. It's hands-on, 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 and you've got a reputation for adding value beyond, right? I mean, you're known for that. Mentoring founders, helping scaling operations, rolling up the sleeves to tackle strategic and technical challenges. You don't run away from it, you run towards the challenge, right? So
because you always leave something positive behind if you do that. Even if a job doesn't work out, or a project doesn't work out, or a startup doesn't work out, just imagine how many lives you influenced if you leave something positive behind. If there's a startup with 100 employees, you touch 100 families and their families. And if you inspire better leadership, or higher integrity, or a better moral compass of doing things the right way, then 100 families will follow that. In Germany, we have the saying, the fish stinks from the head, meaning like whatever the top does, the rest will follow. Of course, the Germans phrase it in a negative way. That's great, right? But, I'm trying to really see leadership starts from the top and culture starts from the top. And even if the job doesn't work out, man, what an opportunity to change or impact culture and people.
Yeah, but the reverberations are bigger than the employees of the company, because it's going to influence, it's going to have an economic development impact on the community or the country, the region as well, right? So,
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and then we see the NATO Innovation Fund co-founder from 2022 to 2024, where NATO announced the creation of the NATO Innovation Fund, a £1 billion multi-sovereign venture fund aimed at investing in dual-use deep technologies for defense, security, resilience. And you are selected as one of the founding partners of this NATO Innovation Fund, which means they checked you out, right?
Oh yeah, they did.
Right. So, so can you talk about that work? Because I mean, I'm sure a lot of it's classified, so you can't talk deeply about it, but that's a pretty big mantle to take on, right?
Yeah, and again, one of these opportunities once in a lifetime that, don't happen very often. And as a background, NATO had tried to create like some innovation investment unit for a long time. And the initial idea was to create a bank. Of course, it collides with all national banks. You can't do that. But the venture part was untapped yet. And then Russia invades Ukraine, brutally assaults it, and takes away a lot of the freedoms. And there was an attack on a wake-up call. Not that we shouldn't have woken up before with Crimea, maybe, but there's definitely a wake-up call. And NATO used that as a catalyst to create this NATO Innovation Fund in order to fund strategic, critical technologies. And initially, it was just an idea in 22 when we started discussing that. And I helped them with various, and by the way, again, together with many, many other people to think through setting up the fund, in what way, what's the model here, what's the strategy, what can we do. But at the time when we started the discussion in April 22, I in no way was supposed to be a partner at this fund, because this was direct investing at the time into early stage technologies, into deep tech technologies that are dual use for defense and civil applications in Europe. And I said, they're phenomenal investors in Europe. You don't need me for that. They're better people. And I sent them a list of 20 people they should contact. But then in November, they said, actually, I think we need to start with fund investing. And I said, well, that I have done and I can help. But still, there were so many phenomenal other fund investors that they evaluated. And it was really about an assessment of 5 people together, that the LPs, which were 24 sovereign nations of NATO, and you remember, like Finland had just joined in 23, Sweden joined in 24 NATO, right? So a brand new group of people who said, we want to back critical technologies in food security, energy security, all things that people battle about, like materials, resources, and of course also defense applications, right? So deep tech in defense was one of the themes, and was incredibly lucky to be elected by the LPs as one of the 5 founding partners, together with Chris O'Connor and Kelly Chen and Patrick Schneider-Korsky, like phenomenal people. Like, oh man, what great partners. I couldn't have wished for more there, and really enjoyed building out that new sort of infrastructure that could become a lighthouse within Europe, that venture in deep tech for defense is even possible. And so if you think back in 2023, in Europe, no one would do defense investing. Absolutely not, right? There was an absolute no-go area. In fact, the first 2 months when we started, we didn't even have a bank, because the bank wouldn't want to bank us. We couldn't find anyone. We didn't get paid for 2 months, right? Initially, there was no expenses, no payment, no nothing. And it was a phenomenal experience to stand this up from the ground and change the way how Europe thinks about defense investing. They're incredibly lucky to be part of that group.
Yeah, and again, pioneering, and it really represents all of this pioneering spirit, the curiosity spirit, the the venture aspect of trying things that are different and succeeding as well. And you actually relocated from Berkeley to Amsterdam to help you.
That's right.
And build this unprecedented fund, right? So
I knew this was a once in a lifetime situation where you need to leave your difficulties behind and think about the greater good, and that included moving myself to Amsterdam and my son as well to Amsterdam, who was like 14 at the time, that was a big step, of course, right? To think about moving a family over into a whole new country. My son doesn't speak Dutch nor German, right? So unfortunately, in Amsterdam, everyone speaks English. So that was the easy part, actually. And of course, Amsterdam is a great city, man. I mean, what a great city. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in your strategic foresight and venture experience, of course, being critical, really instrumental in setting up the this NATO investment processes and scouting deep tech startups across NATO member countries. And really, you led the fund of funds platform. So really identifying, and you mentioned the top emerging VC fund managers across allied nations. So really speaks to your venture background, right? So
in the first year, I met 400 managers at least twice. So I always talk about you need to meet them at least twice in order to have at least 2 data points, right?
Right.
And amazing. I mean, the privilege to travel across Europe and meet these managers and look at their pitch decks and determine which ones would qualify for the mission of NATO Innovation Fund, which is capacity building, adoption, and of course returns, right? That's no mistake. This is not a charity project. We need to make returns for investors because our investors are pension funds and endowments and sovereign wealth funds. And this is money that someone paid in. And I'd like to have something back, okay? And we need to compete with that product, with that financial product on the capital market. We can't just say, oh, if we lose it all, it's fine because it's just strategic, right? No, this is someone's money. It's public money. You don't gamble with that. You need to pay things. You need to build schools. You need to build infrastructure with that, right? And so it's very important to have a competitive product.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really remarkable, especially for Europe, right? Because normally people think of, the North American venture market being a little bit more mature. And in essence, you're being a catalyst for further maturity in the European space as well. And because you have this pan-European, but also North American experience, combining it is such a perfect kind of conduit to, jumpstart the regional deep tech ecosystems, strengthen sovereign capabilities through venture capital. You worked on deploying capital in sectors like AI, quantum, aerospace, cybersecurity, other frontier technologies, which, you look today, those are the things that are really just exploding, right? And driving the world. And in fact, in those days, going back those years, people were still thinking they're still way ahead, but now it's all compressing. So having the foresight to get involved in those areas, and when you're dealing with a multi-nation fund, there's unique challenges about governance and stakeholder alignment. And I know that because I do some sovereign kind of related work. And so it's a different mindset, and you have to be very conscious of that as well.
You're right.
Go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, you even have to put your own family office investing roles, right?
That's right. I had to stop all investing. I had to stop deploying capital into managers. I have to stop teaching at Berkeley or Northeastern, because there's obviously a conflict of interest or potential, a difficult situation if you're working for potentially defense startups and bringing defense into universities was really frowned upon at the time, right? We're not allowed. That changed a bit. And not the least, by the way, through the Gordian Knot initiative at Stanford, right? So many universities now have a very strong defense posture, but that wasn't always the case, right?
Yeah, the world has changed dramatically, for sure. Yeah. So you then make a difficult decision to pursue new professional opportunities as well, and
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think what happened was that there was real strategic differences what this fund should look like between the board and the CEO or the managing partner of the NATO Innovation Fund, the one person of us 5 who was supposed to lead this. And it's not that the strategy was wrong or a bad decision. It's just something I couldn't underwrite. I had so many discussions with LPs, and I knew what the LPs wanted. And it seemed to me that the strategy would not honor that commitment. And I said, it's not something that I think is a bad idea. It's just something that I personally am the wrong person to do that work. And when that happens, when you feel that you're no longer connected to the pathway that leadership sets, then you need to leave. You need to make room. There are many happy people at the NATO Innovation Fund that joined the NATO Innovation Fund because of that strategy, right? Why would you stand in the way? You leave. I think Kelly and Chris were kind of in the same boat. They left, I think, like 6 or 9 months later as well. But I can't talk for them either. But the fact is that I left the organization and the board, but not the mission. So as soon as I came back, I continued exactly there where I had left, with cross-Atlantic technology transfer for defense and security and resilience. And that mission hasn't changed. You can do that in many ways. You don't need to do it at just this one organization.
Yeah, so now we're getting into the phase of your life about Thinkstorm Ventures and your current focus from 2024 to present. You have a family office Evergreen fund, so returning in California in mid-2024.
Yeah.
Reactivated your family office under the brand Thinkstorm Ventures, named after your long-running blog and handle, Thinkstorm. So, which really reflects the drug day and when you're
the wild storm of thoughts. That's right.
Yeah. I could see all, and kind of jazz music as well, right? So rather than raise a traditional VC fund from outside LPs, you established the Evergreen Fund, and composed entirely of your own capital, and it represents 100% GP commitments.
That's right. Oh, that's scary.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Evergreen vehicle, right? It definitely gives you maximum flexibility in timelines and strategy, and you have this kind of motto, right? Life is too short for herding outside LPs, so you can then focus on those things of self-selecting exceptional venture fund managers and high-impact startups. So can you talk more about that?
Sure. I think there are two sides of that, because there is Thinkstorm Ventures as a backer of emerging managers. I was fortunate enough, to be able to deploy capital with the relationships I had through Northgate Capital, right? I mean, Brent and Tommy had done such phenomenal work, and Ellen Chow to select great managers. And so I knew how great managers look like, but I also know what's possible, and that there's a glass ceiling in many of these firms, where the next generation of partners, there's just not yet another general partner role. And it's very difficult for them, but you know what their track record is. And so the first thing I actually did was, when I left the NATO Innovation Fund, is to start backing those managers that I had backed in the NATO Innovation Fund, because I had not just underwritten them for NATO Innovation Fund and spent someone else's money. I backed a mission there. I backed an integrity, a team, foresight. So I'm an advisor at Baltic Sandbox Ventures, one of the investments. I am an LP in Twintrax. I'm, a venture partner at Joint Capital, where we made an investment. There's the next fund of 201 VC, where I'm going to be an LP in. The first one had closed already, but immediately I backed Eric, right? And so I deploy my money where not just my passion is, but also where I think the vision is the right way. And so the mission is so important, because it means people more than dollars, right? It means, like, how do these people treat other people in the world, and other VCs and other investors and other entrepreneurs, of course, right? And it's incredibly rewarding to back these emerging managers, often solo GPs, often female. I think like 70% of my managers are female managers. I think actually women are better investors than men. Can very deep on that one, but it's incredible to see them act like this. And of course, once Kelly left, Kelly Chen, my former partner at the NATO Innovation Fund, I immediately said, I'm going to back your fund. I don't even know what you're doing. Even if it's investing in shish kebab, it's going to be amazing. I don't care what it is. It's going to be awesome. So of course, I basically wrote a blank check there for her support, which is small compared to Silicon Valley, right? I'm a small guy, but it's the support that counts, and incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, you're really
at the same time. So that was one part of Thinkstorm Ventures. The other part is actually very hands-on, back to doing things with my hand, because these funds that I'm mentioning, even the US funds like Prefest Ventures or Veterans Fund, they of course serve democracies. They're there to preserve democracies and freedom and defend the sovereignty of nations. And that for me often means the transatlantic technology transfer and transatlantic capital transfer as well, like the know-how of capital, right? And so I work from 2 a.m. to about 8 a.m. in the morning on Europe, so Pacific time, right? And then from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., I work in a machine shop. And that is a machine shop that has CNC machines and lathes and mills, and I'm literally standing there knee-deep in oil and do the turning of the lathe or milling, and we produce CNC parts, prototypes for defense forces and DoD. So 80% of the business is defense. A lot of space stuff that we do for startup customers as well. Incredibly rewarding to produce new things for startups that are in defense. And 20% is historic racing engines. It's more like a lost business, as you can imagine, but same thing, right? It's a great puzzle, and it's fantastic to restore old engines from the 50s, 60s, 70s that were raced in Formula One or IndyCar or other race classes that are highly regulated. Very rewarding to be in the machine shop and work with my hands. And unlike Inventure, where you ship things like 7 to 10 years from now with DPI, you ship something there every day, and it's one person who's doing it, me. And Inventure, you never know why something happened or why there was a success. There are always many fathers of success, many mothers of success, right? In the machine shop, if the car shows up the next day on the flatbed truck, someone screwed up. If the rod comes out, it's clearly broken. It's very black and white, okay? If the engine explodes, it's probably not doing well. And so that's very rewarding to have like an immediate impact on delivering defense force equipment to special forces in Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland. That's very rewarding.
I'm going to drill a little bit deeper, but I'm going to do a bit of a pause, and that is, I'm just doing a time check. Do you have a hard stop in about 10 minutes, or can you go a little?
No, I can go.
Okay.
Sorry,
okay, that's great.
I'm very passionate about that topic.
Yeah, no, it's great, because I can see then, again, you tinkering. It's kind of like the tinkering thread throughout your entire career, but tinkering in a meaningful way, in doing novel design, novel innovation, bringing different ideas together, creating new things. And you're doing this in the machine shop with CNC machines, these computer controlled systems, and you're building unique products that can be deployed worldwide and have a defense sort of footprint as well. So there'll be classified work in there. It's kind of marvelous. And then you have your fund as well. You're an LP in top funds, and you're a serial limited partner in a number of elite venture funds. You're looking for phenomenal emerging managers. You've indicated earlier that women are really good, become very good fund managers, and there's probably a number of reasons for that: the diligence, the hard work, the dedication, and that sector hits a glass ceiling. So what you're saying is, I'm going to address that. I want to address the underserved communities, and I know when we do sovereign funding, it's one of the measures. And we're transparent, so there's things that are kind of under NDA we can't talk about. We do publish what we look for when we do sovereign funding. When we look for those underserved communities for fund managers, and there's allocation of points in essence for that to address it, right?
That a bit, because I'm not looking for underserved communities. I'm looking for alpha that outperforms the rest of the market. And I happen to find it more often with female GPs than with male GPs. And it's, by the way, a big generalization. Okay, so let's be very clear about this. It's like whenever someone says in venture capital, on average, you should run, because you should really look at top deciles and top quartiles, right? That's what you do. The power curve is very important. But looking at the power curve, for me, it was much easier to see a trajectory of a firm with female founders than with male founders. And the reason I think is, again, a big generalization for me at least, was that many women are much more passionate than ego-driven. Meaning, for them, it's all about lifting others, or more often than not, lifting others about a passion that they have. And when they're wrong about something, they didn't lose the passion. They were just wrong about one segment. And in many male-dominated firms, what I see is a very alpha, ego-driven behavior where it's important that they benefit from something and don't lift the firm. And the firms that I picked with Northgate were the exception to that, where it's like very low ego, very community, everything is lifting others up and giving others opportunity. And that's the firms I like to work with. Sebastian Pinar and Ben Fu and Craig Heinzen at Next World Capital, same thing, right? That's the work environment that I need. Otherwise, I can't thrive. And I often find this easier with female founders than with male founders.
Yeah. So what you're talking about too is that it's more sustainable, right? Is that kind of the sustainability of success is built in. There's this, adhering to the vision of the fund or of the firm rather than of the individual, right? And that's it's a collective effort.
Sandbox, is looking already like 2 funds ahead, like who in their organization they should really like put on this pathway. Which mentors do we need? Like Nicola Sinclair is already for her own, all the founders are also looking out, right? And it's a very different attitude. I mean, there are so many great examples. Sorry, I can go on and on. Embo Ventures, Carly Sapier, right? So there are many good examples where it very clearly shows the dedication and the sustainability that spurs Fund 2, Fund 3, Fund 4. Because
it's really interesting.
You can't invest in one fund, right? You need to invest in 4 generations.
Yeah, and it's really, I'm really pleased about that, because that's what we look at sovereign on the investment selection committees I sit on. And we look at what is the systemic vision, sustainability, but also the benefit to the greater health of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And if you have it individual driven, it's not going to happen. But if you have this kind of team aspect, it's going to have a much bigger impact ultimately over the longer term, right?
Especially at sovereign funds where you have much bigger levers that you turn, right? And
we have big levers already. Yeah,
I mean, amazing. I'm doing my small little thing here, right? You're already like a whole nother league there on impact. It's amazing. I really appreciate what you're doing there with your measurements and your selection process.
So, you're definitely addressing things like hitting glass ceilings or bringing diverse perspectives that are not ego-driven, that are more vision of the fund or the firm, and ultimately for sustainability. New VC managers at the pre-seed seed stage, right? Helping fostering the next generation of venture talent. So you're looking at this successional continuation of the fund. And you're very much into mentorship, sharing lessons learned, and for structuring due diligence and ethics, and which means women are more coachable. I think that's what you're saying. They're more coachable because they're not ego driven. They want ultimately for the success of the fund of the firm and not just their ego, right? So,
I don't know if that's a good word for it, because that would assume that I'm coaching them. And I think that's not true. It's a real dialogue that I experience, that I would actually say women are the better coaches, right? Coaches bring out the best in people and at the same time ingest all the feedback in order to give back the next time. So it's like
I see
ebb and flow.
It's a co-creation of coaching then. So it's a co-creation, coaching, dialogue. Yes. You're coaching each other.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. It is so important to me. You phrased it perfectly. Yes.
So you're really supporting exceptional entrepreneurs, building highly differentiated, different kinds of products, and this has a ripple effect for the venture ecosystem. Again, very much aligned with when you do sovereign funding, you're looking for the health of the ecosystem and improving the ecosystem, right? So you're doing that, and you have things like deep tech and defense and enterprise software, which are thematic interests of your part. You do direct investments as well, and in addition to fund investments, so you continue to make direct investments and expansion stage startups with dual use applications, right? And so that's really interesting and very much ties into some of your background as well, and adding value, right? And because you have this global perspective, not just North America, but Europe, APAC, and of course the US, then you can bring that assistance to scaling across cultures and realizing that, different communities around the world have a different perspective, and you have to address that perspective when you're scaling.
Oh, so true. That's right.
Yeah. And you, what I'm sensing then is you want to really support founders who thrive but pay it forward as well, who are contributing in other ways, right? So mission-driven teams that are creating lasting impact across generations, and of course, cutting-edge domains, because that's your experience, right? Whether it's aerospace or satellites, cybersecurity, AI, quantum, sensing, climate, security tech. And of course, you have this background, NATO, deep tech. And
it's not so much the technology, because of course, like if we would know as VCs the technology better than the entrepreneurs, then why are we not the CTO, right? There's a reason for that. That we invest in them and don't do it, right? But I think it's this decision making under radical uncertainty that I actually enjoy, and I'm not afraid of it. And I make tons of mistakes. That's fine. But it's the radical uncertainty that new technologies bring as an impact onto communities and society. I think that for me has always been fascinating, how frontier things, I'm trying to avoid technology here, frontier things and systems actually impact communities and humans and interactions. And that radical uncertainty is something I enjoy.
But you also, just on the funding side, though, you're also interested in exploring novel, interesting financial products, right? So novel fund structures, evergreen collaborations, hybrid investment vehicles that better align a sort of long-term capital but resilient development. And you're an active writer and commentator of the venture industry as well, critiquing short-termism, right? Advocating for more patient, principled capital deployment. And that's across your roles as an LP, direct investor, system thinker, because you're very, and that system thinking, even to that medical solutions, you're very much a system approach to advancing and bolstering society resilience. So I think that's really, really important. Now, you're back in Berkeley, right? Where you live with your family, and you got a backyard with chickens, right? So you're big into self-sufficiency, urban gardening, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, the chickens were really toys, and we got like tons of eggs out of them. So that was definitely quite something. Yes.
So yeah, but that's a great connection with nature, right? You're an outdoor enthusiast, so
yes,
you unplug in nature. You often do wilderness hikes and camping trips with your family, right? Trekking across the Sierras, the national parks, and things like that. So always kind of tailoring or expanding your experiences beyond all the areas you're in. And you already mentioned this already, you're in historic car racing and engineering, and you have a particular passion in that area. So you're an avid car enthusiast who not only collects classic cars, but also restores and tunes their engines yourself. And you already mentioned this, you have a local machine shop where you spend hours rebuilding high-performance engines, referring to your vintage cars as bucket of bolts affectionately. right?
That's what, because that's what they are. And now cars from the 50s and 60s, man, and then by the way, if you do something wrong, you just cut it off, weld it on, and start over again. It's very
And yeah, and because of this, you become very skilled at precision machining, CNC, and fabrication, and manufacturing custom engine parts, and even aerospace grade components as part of your kind of. It's a hobby, but it's kind of like more than a hobby, right?
Oh yeah, I'm all in right now. I mean, it's again like the shop. I have the good fortune to start in a shop with a shop funding a shop that has phenomenal leaders who are all ex-operators. They all had active duty deployment. They all came back and said, "I want to make a difference in the world." And that background of military service has an incredibly high degree of ownership again. And that's very rewarding. And working with that team together to create the next generation frontier CNC parts, it's the ownership component that's interesting for me, right? If you screw up, you take care of it and fix it. And you're trying to figure out, like, how can we make this better? How can we improve the processes? How can we do good for our customers, right? Customers first. And that attitude permeates the shop in all areas, in the race engine and CNC. And for me, the people part is the most enjoyable one, right?
Yeah, and then there's the downhill skateboarding, right? You're
That's right. That's how I got into the cars. Yeah. So I was downhill skateboarding, on these longboards, standing up, going 60 miles an hour. And then at one point I had an accident and couldn't skateboard and had to find a different hobby. And I thought instead of going very fast down a hill, I could go very fast up the hill in a race car. And so that's how I bought my first car, not knowing what I would get myself into. Again, the white male overconfidence and trying things out. Yeah. But I still do that. I still do downhill skateboarding. I do skate trips in the Sierra, skate trips in various hills around Berkeley. But I love I can't say the name, otherwise I get banned here. There's a famous pass in the Sierras that I love, goes down from 9,500 to 5,000 feet. It's a phenomenal run, very, very fast, but you can see every corner, so, it's not dangerous for the upcoming traffic. And I very much enjoy that, that being one with nature, reading the road ahead, understanding the undulations, understanding how your board feels, and just skateboarding. No other thought possible. When you go down 60 miles an hour, road on wheels, that can leave serious road rash. So you better be present.
Yeah, you definitely have to be present. You got to shut everything off, right?
That's right. So for me, it's like therapy. Yeah.
But you also do motor trains and other urban hobbies, right? You enjoy motor trains and being involved in local urban development initiatives as well, too.
Yeah, so the model train is the thing of the past where I built a whole model train set, everything like the whole miniature things. Again, the building, the tinkering, the play with it, learned a lot about it. But once I was done with that train set, I was like, okay, I'm done. The building was the fun part. I'm not interested in playing so much with it. I just wanted to build it. And so then I, moved on to the next thing, which was woodworking and other things. I always like to build things and I would say like tap into new skill sets to understand what is transferable to other areas in my work. So,
but you're interested in urban planning and gardening, right? Or
that's right. Yeah. So that was also part of my investment thesis while I was at Deutsche Telekom T Ventures, right? To understand how can we build urban environments more suitable for humans, not just for work, but for communities. How do we change garden structures? How do we change zoning laws? How do we change how people live together? With technology and without technology, there's a technology component to it, but there's also a people aspect to it where you need to create communities. And that urban development is very dear to my heart. Otherwise, we're going to create heartless cities that are only there for work and commerce. And there's more to cities than work and commerce.
And then you earlier alluded to this as well. You're an educator and definitely a storyteller. You're very inspiring and engaging, and graduate level courses at UC Berkeley and Northeastern University as a professor, lecturing or have lectured on things like entrepreneurial finance or venture capital, and you're widely regarded as a pretty superb storyteller in the venture community, right? Because you can weave historical anecdotes with technical details and wisdom in a compelling way. So you've done a lot of different things. You have thought leadership with blog and media, right? Writing a personal blog.thinkstorm.com. And so parallels.
Again, I'm trying to share what I see and learn. And I always hope that people comment on it, which they often do. Write me emails because my email is right there. My phone number is right there. People can call me and reach out because I want to know when I'm wrong or what I got. What's more nuanced than what I thought, right? And you can only do that if you put yourself out there and make yourself vulnerable and in order to learn more about it and go deeper and think about second and third level consequences and not just the surface.
Yeah, I mean, your commentary is principled and it's candid. You're candid here. Conviction without noise, right? Insight without spectacle. So it's kind of like your German background, right?
That's thank you. Yeah, but also I think one of the important principles that I learned, especially at the NATO Innovation Fund and at Northgate, is don't only say the truth, but make sure people hear the truth. So often we say something and someone else interprets it differently, and we kind of know they just did. And it's important to set that right, not let it slip, right? To make sure that you're not trying with a hand-wavy half story that you hope the other person misinterprets, and then you can say, well, I never said this because, I mean, that's not what I really meant, right? But don't only say the truth, make sure people hear the truth that you want to communicate. And that's very hard. It's incredibly difficult because you need to understand the other person's culture and their background, and you have to ask questions. You have to say, play it back to me. How did you hear that, right? So to make sure really that you have to have a very high interest in others to do that well.
You got this marvelous reputation, a system thinker. You're definitely a builder at heart, respected for your great, outstanding analytical skills, your diligence. You have a moral standing, you have strategic clarity. You bring a long-term, mission-driven lens to what you do. You're definitely our mentor or a co-creator coach as well. But you do this with humility and approachability, which is for somebody who has all this success, and yet you sort of this rare combination of engineer, investor, professor, hobbyist, and very much down-to-earth credibility in every circle. Right,
and I'm idiot, so that's okay.
Well, that's your humility, right, and your approachability. Right? So,
thank you.
So just a couple more questions, and so we're going to just touch on the future for a moment, and then we'll get to some of your recommendations and questions that you want to leave the audience. So I'm gonna give 11 areas that I'm just going to sort of talk about, and then you pick some that you think you want to talk about where they're going to go at the next, let's say, 5 years. So I'm embedded in all of these. So I'm telling you areas I'm interested in. So supercomputer and high performance computing already exascale, and it's going to zettascale in the cloud, and by 2030 probably be Yoda scale. And which means you can do 1,000 billion molecules for new drug discovery in minutes, that kind of thing, right? And then we have chip technologies like photonic and analog thermodynamic and existing GPUs and system on chips and things like that. You have quantum, and you're an investor in quantum, so quantum sensing, communications, and quantum computing. You have novel materials, advanced new kinds of materials, programmable materials. There's things like advanced networks, 5G, but 6G will be standardized by 2030, which would do phenomenal things. You have AI machine learning, which can be, if you were to go back 10 years, what we have today would be considered artificial general intelligence. And there's this idea of super intelligence There's robotics, automation, and drones, which are increasingly being automated. Automated vehicles, so that's a whole sort of different category. You have biotech, which is just exploding. David Sinclair, for example, is already in clinical trials on the de-aging kind of treatments that you could do, starting with the eyes. And then, but that's just one example, biotech. And then, of course, neurotech, brain-computer interfaces. You have advanced energy and storage, so fusion, all of these green energy initiatives, what's happening with like sodium batteries, things like that. There's even gravity storage now, and new kinds of novel storage mechanisms. There's advanced manufacturing and space technologies. So out of all of that kind of bucket, kind of cherry pick the ones and make a prediction of where they're going to go in the next 5 years.
Oof, that's a big task. So if I would know where they were going, then I would already own the island that I'm looking at. Just look at it. I'm sitting here in Helsinki right now in a hotel room that you can see, and because I'm doing investments in Helsinki here, and I think what you just said, what I hope is going to change is energy. I think energy permeates so many areas and is a foundation to AI, foundation to robotics, foundation to space, that I really hope we're going to see fusion energy and other energy sources, not in the technology sense, not in, I hope we get fusion energy, but I hope that creates so much gravitation that a lot of people find this is going to be a field they want to be prolific at and go into. And usually it's not the technology that's going to be transformational, it's the people who have incredible ideas around all the other areas of energy. And so my prediction is that there's going to be a new way of energy, and we're going to say in the end, whatever, it's a new way of energy. But the other things that spurs new math, new physics models, new transportation, new propulsion systems, new ways of unit economics for water desalination, new ways of thinking about space travel. I think these type of things will have a huge impact. And I think the first impact we're going to see is actually writers and artists, maybe musicians, I don't know. But I think the most creative people on this planet will take that to the absolute next level. And I'm really looking forward to that part, because usually it's that interplay between poetry and literature and art and paintings and sculptures that creates a whole new mindset, a whole new framing about things that opens up people's minds. So art and play are incredibly important for innovation. And I hope that people interact with that in a way. So my forecast is that we're going to see a transformation, not because of the technology, but because of the people who work in that field and get inspired. And when I would pick another one, I would say that I hope that AI and machine learning, what we call AI and machine learning, and you know that better, and we can fiddle up the field there, is kind of the next generation of customized knowledge that will inspire people to do more things faster and better things faster and think through second and third level consequences with the help of AI. So if search and the internet was in the 90s and 2000s, where you suddenly could find information, it will become an auto mechanic because you have YouTube videos, guilty. Then you can use AI to do the same thing that we did with YouTube, just on a 1000x level. And despite all our worries about, but will it regress to the median? Will it have like stupid solutions? Will it be wrong? Come on, man. We survived YouTube. We're not completely dead yet, okay? We didn't follow every YouTube video that we saw. And, yes, some people ate Tide Pods, supposedly, right? Others didn't, okay? There's a natural selection, maybe. I don't know. But I think we as humans are much better than the fears we project. And we're much more creative than the fears we have about the future. Doesn't mean we shouldn't work on those, but it means I'm less negative. I'm much more positive. I believe in human nature and in the positivity that will bring. And I think we're going to learn to interact with AIs and machines, not in a split economy that splits into a machine economy and a human economy, but just more creativity all around.
So it's definitely going to empower every segment of society, right? All of these elements that you're talking about. So
it inspires the creativity in people. Now I can do the mundane tasks faster and focus my effort on the creative part. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it empowers definitely the creative part, right? Democratizes it, makes it accessible to everybody.
So true. Well said, Steve. Well said. Yeah.
So the last question is, what final recommendation do you want to make the audience? And sort of an aligned sort of question to that is, what questions do you want to leave the audience? In other words, questions that they should be asking themselves. So what is your final recommendations? And then what questions do you want the audience to ponder?
I think my recommendation is make space to take advantage of opportunities. So I always think about risk in a very weird way. For me, the definition of risk is the probability of fatal outcome within given resources. The probability of irreversible fatal outcome with given resources. And what that means is that a lot of things are actually very low risk because it can be reversed. It might take a month longer, but if you have a month, then it's a nuisance, okay? And not a risk. If you have the money and, you have a little bit more runway, then it's like bad and you would have rather spent the money on something else, but it's not a risk, really, you're not dead. And so I think to think about risk in a different way and think about making space for opportunities and thinking about orthogonal value you actually get out of these opportunities. So even if I left the NATO Innovation Fund, I was incredibly lucky to work with Chris and Kelly on amazing new ways of structuring venture capital, of thinking about sovereign funds, of thinking about creating lighthouse examples and deep tech. Nothing would have, all the other stuff doesn't matter. What matters is, man, there is like a whole universe out there that I can still be passionate about. It's still my mission to do that. And that hasn't changed. And so that's the positive part. I took the opportunity. Was there risk in it? I don't know. It wasn't that risky to me. It was reversible, obviously. I survived it. And so I think from that perspective, I would urge people to think about risk very differently. And maybe that's the question I would leave people. Even if it's a difficult path, what's the first reversible step you can take that, is reversible? It doesn't cost you anything other than maybe time and a little bit of money that you have. Hopefully you have the resources,
Thor, I mean, that was brilliant. You tied the recommendation to a question. So
I don't know. It's so hard because your audience is so amazing and your audience spans so many different fields that I don't want to be prescriptive. I'd rather, try to have something that they can apply in every situation.
Well, you definitely inspired in the audience this active questioning and observing and experimenting and trying different things and combinatorial connecting different thoughts and respecting all these different kind of modalities and sort of like a matrix thinking relationships. I mean, you're a great example of forming diverse relationships and the power relationships. Also resilience and agility and optimism and hard work, which you very much modeled, and constant sort of the curiosity of reading things on the edge or being familiar with the things that are out there. And you combine all of those things; those are really the formula for success, whatever path you choose, right? So. And you are a great model for that, sort of you're a template for what you've done and how you approach life. So thank you so much for coming in and sharing your wisdom and experiences with our audience.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for all the great questions that made me think much more about other areas that I need to work on. Thank you, and for your kind words as well.
So thank you again. In fact, your audio sort of really reduced in that last bit. So just to the audience, you were just indicating you were enjoying the experience and the opportunity to share, to co-coach live in a
Yes.
Okay, great. Your audio came back, so it
Good.
reduced and it came back. Again, thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.